We tested 3 of the most up-to-date superbikes from the 2025 model year for you. We were out riding 2 full days on the open road and 2 more days here on the racetrack at the Slovakiaring. And we've got a lot to talk about, so make sure you stick around. What bikes did we bring along? Let's start from left to right. First up, the new RSV4. It now puts out 220 horsepower and earns the crown as the most powerful superbike. Aprilia didn't stop there though. They've continued refining it with some new components. It now features high purity brakes and the chassis geometry has been slightly revised for 2025. There have also been a bunch of small updates on the electronics front. Next, the Ducati Panigale V4S. It's the most expensive bike in our comparison, and it's truly the pinnacle of Italian engineering. Massive V4 power, but with a different firing order compared to the Aprilia. Ducati has also given it quite a few updates for 2025. The single-sided swing arm is gone. Instead, they've gone with a traditional double-sided swing arm for weight-saving reasons. They've also managed to reduce some weight from the frame. It now comes with a new braking system, and the 3rd generation Öhlins suspension, the Smart EC 3.0, is now on board. And last but not least, the BMW, the double R model for 2025. Probably the bike with the least amount of technical changes, but still, there have been a few tweaks. BMW now offers a very complete package. Features that used to be optional extras like the pro riding modes or a quick shifter are now included as standard. And it's worth noting that at least on paper, it's the most affordable entry into this trio of superbikes we got to test. That said, we do have a few optional extras on board. We've got the M-brake system, carbon wheels, and rear sets from Gilles Tooling. BMW didn't give us a completely stock bike. It's been visually and technically spruced up a bit. But alright folks, let's not waste any more time. I know you're here to hear our impressions. We're starting off with the road ride. Because let's be honest, many of you out there still ride these kinds of superbikes on the open road, maybe hitting up a track day every now and then. And for those of you who are really looking to push the limits and want to hear about pure performance, the second part of the video takes us to the racetrack. Who was with us? Of course, I wasn't testing alone. We had Martin Bauer on board, our test and tech expert, a 3-time IDM champion. If anyone knows what they're doing, it's him. But we also had some fresh blood with us, Lena Kemmer, a young racing talent from Austria. She competed last year in the Women's World Championship, and I'm really thrilled to have her with us for this test. Then we also had our sporty all-rounder Philip from the 1000 PS editorial team. And me, yours truly. No need for introductions, I think you all know me by now. Alright folks, let's get into it. Let's take a look at our first impressions from the road.
I actually really like the engine of the Aprilia, mainly because that V4 character is just very pleasant. And also in terms of refinement, it's probably the smoothest of the 3 bikes. The Ducati, which is also a V4, doesn't have quite the same smooth and rounded running characteristics, especially at low revs, as the Aprilia does. And the BMW with its pure inline-4 engine is, of course, absolutely brilliant for the racetrack. That kind of engine layout really shines there. But for road riding, the engine struggles a bit to deliver strong pull from lower revs. They did try to compensate for that with slightly shorter gearing, especially in first gear, so it pulls better from down low, but you're still dealing with a displacement that's 1000 cc less than the other 2 bikes and with the inherent traits of an inline-4. You still feel a bit of buzziness on the BMW. It's nothing totally new. They've tried to reduce it with heavier bar end weights, and that has helped a bit. But all in all, I'd say that's why I'd actually lean towards the Aprilia's engine for road use. The smoothness and the way it pulls from low revs, it's just that bit better than the Ducati. When it comes to peak power, all of them are way beyond what you'd ever need on the road. So whether one has 5 horsepower more or less, it really doesn't matter. Maybe it's something for bragging rights at the pub, but for actual riding, I'd go with the Aprilia.
Yeah, I completely agree with Martin on this. The Aprilia just works best in almost all road situations, whether you're riding through towns or on unrestricted roads. The whole package just fits. I also really like the BMW, but it is still a bit more unsettled. It needs a bit more revs to really get going from down low. And that's always a bit trickier on the road because if you really wring it out, you're instantly going way too fast. So I think the Aprilia just feels more balanced in that regard. And with the Ducati, it's also the case that it runs quite rough at low revs. I don't really like that. Sure, higher up in the rev range, it's incredibly fast, but on the road, you just can't really make use of that. So just looking at it from that perspective, I'd also say the Aprilia is my favorite.
Honestly, for me, it's a tie between the BMW and the Aprilia. The Aprilia definitely has more punch down low, usable punch, rideable punch, but I don't think it's that bad that the BMW doesn't have quite as much low-end torque, because in my opinion, it still has enough for the road in pretty much any situation. And I actually found the inline-4 engine very easy to ride.
When it comes to handling and rideability, I have to say all three performed quite well. We were able to ride these superbikes on country roads without any problems. Even through really tight corners, they're surprisingly manageable. But you can feel a noticeable difference between the bikes. I'd maybe split them into two categories. First category, the Ducati and the Aprilia. These two are incredibly stable and give you a lot of front-end feedback. And then there's the BMW, which is almost too nimble or reactive, especially in really tight corners, like those 30 kilometers per hour hairpins we had a lot of. It actually plays to its advantage. At that point, you're not trying to push the front tire to its limits. At 30 kilometers per hour, I'm just happy if I can keep the whole bike balanced. And in that sense, the BMW's behavior is genuinely helpful. So we've got two bikes built more around stability and precision, which actually gives them a slight disadvantage in handling compared to the BMW. That said, all of them are still very usable on the road. Honestly, I was impressed by how manageable they are in daily riding, apart from the seating position, which is clearly more on the sporty side, of course, as long as you avoid those super tight hairpins, because that's where the revs drop too low and so on. Like we already mentioned, they're totally fine. Overall, agility and rideability are good across the board, with those slight differences between the two categories. If you're doing speeds of around 100 to 120 kilometers per hour, then you'll notice the Ducati and Aprilia start to feel a bit heavier to handle than the BMW. The BMW stays pretty nimble even at those higher speeds, especially when it comes to switching lean angles from one side to the other, something you often do on country roads. This is where you're not trying to find the absolute limit of front grip like you would on the racetrack. It's more about that effortless, playful feeling. And in that sense, the BMW definitely has an advantage. You'll need less physical effort over the course of a full day compared to the other two. Because while the Ducati and Aprilia have their strengths in other areas, when it comes to how much effort it takes to ride, the BMW is definitely the easiest on the body.
For me, again, the Aprilia was my favorite. I just think it rides really stable, but still very easy to handle. It's just really nice to lean it into corners, especially in fast sweepers where all of these bikes are great. But the Aprilia was definitely my top pick because it also handled well in slower corners. That's where the Ducati was more difficult for me. The engine kind of stutters more down there and you get way more load changes, which just gets in the way. And with the BMW, because you're sitting further forward and riding more through the handlebars, it does feel a bit twitchy. You really need to apply more force to get it to flow nicely through corners.
For me, hands down, if I had to pick one for a full day of riding, it would be the BMW, simply because of the seating position. What you guys already mentioned, the bike's nimbleness and geometry that's not solely focused on ultimate stability actually really works in my favor as a regular rider. When I'm in the saddle of the BMW, everything just feels easier and more natural to me. Whereas on the Ducati, I actually struggled a bit, especially in tighter turns. My second choice would definitely be the Aprilia.
Yeah, on the Aprilia, you're seated relatively low. What that means is the distance between the seat and the very high foot pegs gets pretty tight. And if we take a look, let me just hop on real quick, it creates a really tight knee angle. For you, that probably wouldn't be a problem because of your height. But for me, at 1.80 m and with fairly long legs, it's quite sporty, almost too aggressive for longer road rides. That's maybe a small drawback with the Aprilia. Something else I noticed on the BMW, which might be relevant for road use. We had to turn around quite often on the street. And if you look at the BMW, it actually has a bit of an issue here. When you turn the handlebars all the way, and let me just switch hands for a second, my hand hits the tank. It's really hard to do a proper U-turn with full steering lock and still be able to use the throttle or clutch properly. The other bikes handle that way better. If you look at the positioning of the clip-ons in relation to the tank, take the Ducati, for example, which is a very sporty bike, it still leaves more clearance. Even at full lock, my hands are farther from the tank and I've got more room to work. Same goes for the Aprilia. They've done a really nice job with that, flattened out the tank, raised the clip-ons a bit so you can reach everything easily. On the BMW, they had to basically carve an undercut into the tank just so the clip-ons would fit at all. And yeah, that's just one of those little observations that stood out during our comparison. It might be interesting to some of you.
With the BMW, you get a very direct brake feel. There's almost no free play and then it bites quite hard right away, so you definitely need a bit of finesse. You can't just grab a handful of brake right off the bat. Sure, you've got the rider aids, but it's maybe not the most comfortable braking experience. On the Ducati, the brakes also work really well. It's a confident, solid brake system, and you can apply it with a lot of feel. It's really well tuned in that sense. And on the Aprilia, the brakes are quite soft initially. I don't know if maybe there's a bit of air in the system, but the first touch feels very soft. Then it builds up in a very pleasant, controlled way, and you can modulate it really well.
The real differences are only going to show on the racetrack anyway, where the braking systems are pushed to their absolute limits. But even on the road, you can notice some clear differences in the basic setup. With the Ducati and the Aprilia, they're clearly designed for high brake pad temperatures, which means they don't bite super aggressively in normal road conditions, where you've got more or less ambient temperature in the system, maybe just a little above that. You're usually just cruising and only braking now and then. By contrast, the BMW has a completely different setup for its brake pads and rotors. It bites sharply even at relatively cool temperatures. It's not overwhelming or anything, but it delivers strong braking force with very little hand pressure. For someone who says, I want strong braking with minimal input, that's a huge advantage. You can almost brake hard with just one finger, and that definitely has its upsides. But for someone who prefers a softer initial response from the brakes, they'll probably feel more comfortable with the Ducati or the Aprilia. Overall, you could say that the BMW gives you significantly more braking force with less effort, especially at lower temperatures, and it's still pretty easy to modulate. The other two, while they require more hand pressure to achieve the same stopping power, still offer excellent performance. You just have to squeeze a bit harder. But all three bikes have high-level braking systems. The electronics these days are really good on all of the bikes, actually. Back in the early days, the quality of these systems varied a lot between manufacturers. But now you have to say everything is there and it's all on a really high level. For normal road use, it's more than enough.
It's kind of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's obviously cool when you buy a bike and can customize everything individually via a menu or a server. It really does vary a lot from rider to rider. One rider might prefer a bit more engine braking, another a bit less. And same with the rider aids. When they intervene, how much wheel slip is allowed on the rear or the front wheel. But I have to say, it can definitely be overwhelming. You really have to spend a lot of time with it. I tried a bit on all three bikes, but honestly, it's crazy how many submenus there are. And without reading the manual first, it's really, really hard to figure out what's what.
Here at the Slovakiaring, during the 1000 PS track days, the four of us are doing some intense testing. And to make things as comparable as possible, we didn't just use the racetrack. We also fitted all the bikes with super grippy Pirelli Supercorsa SPs, 4th generation, maximum comparability, so you can get really accurate and useful results from us.
Let's also take a quick look at our gear. You might have noticed that our test crew was all wearing NEX helmets, specifically the XR3R model. That's the sportiest helmet in the NEX portfolio. It's made with a carbon shell, pleasantly lightweight, 1,350 grams in size medium. And what I personally really liked was the great aerodynamics. With that additional spoiler element on the back, color matched to the visor, it really looks the part too. Visually, it's a real eye-catcher. Very classy and high-quality finish. The ventilation also impressed us. Even on the racetrack, our heads stayed cool. You can adjust it easily using the openings on the forehead, top of the head and chin area. That all worked great. And what was also really nice was the snug, sporty fit. Especially for track riding, for sporty riding in general, it's truly a very exciting product. We really enjoyed it. Now it gets serious. Now we're diving into the action on the racetrack, the Slovakiaring, which is a pretty demanding and fast circuit with lots of crests as well. Overall, I think it was a scenario that gave us a great opportunity to really bring out the strengths, but also maybe some of the weaknesses of these bikes. We measured around 30 degrees of asphalt temperature here. In the pit lane, we were perfectly prepared. We even rolled out a nice paddock mat. We brought paddock stands with us, tire warmers were on hand, and of course for tires, once again we went with the Pirelli Supercorsa SP 4th generation. We preheated them perfectly for every session, so we could fully focus on riding and hopefully collect some solid impressions in a proper sporting context.
Let's maybe start right away with the BMW and its 1000cc inline 4-cylinder engine. As we mentioned earlier, it does have a bit of a disadvantage in terms of displacement compared to the others. You do notice that a little bit on the track as well. It doesn't have quite the same punch at low revs. But on the racetrack, that doesn't matter as much because you're mostly riding at higher RPMs anyway, and we're basically always in the engine's performance window. We also have to be fair and mention that the BMW, as it's standing here, is the only one in this trio that would actually be eligible for World Superbike racing, since that class has a displacement limit of 1000cc. The others rely on those extra 100cc just to squeeze out a bit more potential, but for a regular rider, that's not a big deal. They'll happily take the extra cc and say, I don't care, it can be 100 more, no problem, as long as the performance is right. The BMW does have to wrestle a bit with that handicap. What stands out with the BMW engine, something we already know from previous models, is the vibration. It was already pretty annoying on the road, and you feel it on the track too. As long as you stick with the stock clip-ons, which have weights inside, it's still somewhat manageable. But if you swap those for lightweight aftermarket clip-ons without bar end weights, it becomes a real issue. You even notice it on the racetrack, it gets uncomfortable after a while. In terms of peak performance, it's not far off the others. It performs quite well and works nicely on track. The Ducati, by contrast, is brutally purpose-built for the racetrack. Same goes for the engine. We're talking about sky-high revs, up to 15,000 RPM. The V4 engine really delivers in the upper rev range. It needs a minimum RPM to function well, but that rough character it shows on the street isn't an issue on track, because you're never really riding down in that lower RPM range. The long first gear on the Ducati helps a ton. I was able to use that quite well in some situations on track for max acceleration out of corners. That's really well done. And when you wind it out, it revs incredibly freely. The Aprilia, by comparison, also has a V4, but with a bit more linear power delivery and a smoother overall feel. Still, it doesn't quite deliver the extra performance the spec sheet suggests, even though it's the most powerful one in the trio on paper. But I have to say, it's still a blast to ride. The V4 character is just so strong and fun. So overall, I'd say that in terms of racetrack use, the Ducati engine probably has the most to offer. It has one huge advantage, a counter-rotating crankshaft. That helps massively when it comes to transferring the load toward the ground and making all that power usable. It really helps to keep the front wheel down and convert it into forward motion. So purely in terms of engine performance, I'd say that's definitely a top-tier setup.
In my opinion, all three engine concepts work really well. On the racetrack, you can really open them up and let it rip. And with all three, you've got great torque available throughout. The BMW just needs a bit more revs, but when it's there, it pushes really hard. It's a different engine concept, of course, and you do notice that a bit, especially in terms of rotating mass. With the Aprilia, you can shoot out of the corners super nicely. It's honestly a dream how well that works. And the Ducati, well, that thing is just in a league of its own. No matter what RPM you're in, if you twist the throttle on that, it just goes, just brutally fast.
As far as the engine goes, I have to say, As a more average rider, I definitely noticed the difference in engine character between the V4s and the inline 4, but in terms of pure power, it's not that huge of a gap. I couldn't get off one of these bikes and say, this one is way more powerful than that one. They're all really close. We're talking about a 10 horsepower difference here. That said, I personally liked the RSV4 engine the most because it had a bit more torque down low compared to the Ducati. That helps if you mess up your line or are in the wrong gear. If you're a gear too high or too low, the Aprilia's extra torque at the bottom end bails you out more easily. The Ducati is brutal, sure, but you have to ride it with a bit more precision. And I think that's the big difference. Out of the three models, I'd say the easiest to ride for the average rider is the BMW because it's very forgiving. If you're riding a bit faster, then it's probably the Aprilia. And in my opinion, the Ducati needs a more experienced hand. I'll just say it openly, they're all so overloaded with electronics from my perspective that you really need time to dig into it. I didn't take that time, and in our test setting we didn't really have that time either. So let me put it another way. For an average rider, everything you need is in there. It all works at such a high level that you can crack open the throttle at corner exit as a non-pro and it keeps you alive. And that's always my main point. Same goes for braking. When I hit the ABS, there are only the tiniest differences. But honestly, the variation in my own laps from round to round is bigger than the differences in the electronics. So what more is there to say? I'll keep it short, buy it, and you'll be more than happy. Period.
I always like to try riding with all systems completely switched off and then in the lowest level of intervention just to see how the performance changes. Because for fast riders, it's not just about staying safe in the saddle, it's also about lap times. That used to be the problem with a lot of rider aids. They really got in the way or cost too much performance. But now all manufacturers have done a lot of work and you can ride really fast on all bikes, even with active electronic aids. The way to get there is a little different depending on how well you can configure and adjust the systems. Also, the display that shows which system is currently intervening differs a bit. On the Ducati, for example, you get this nice little gimmick on the right side of the display where all the rider aids are listed, and when they activate, they light up. That's super helpful for someone who isn't running data recording and just wants to optimize their setup. If you're focused enough, you can see what was intervening when the power dropped off. Now, like, I wanted more drive there. Then you can specifically dial that system back a bit. I think that's a really useful tool for the average rider because you're getting extra info. On the Aprilia, something that works really well is the additional control via the plus-minus buttons. That allows you to increase or decrease traction control settings while riding without diving into menus. Because often when you're out on track, you realize, oh, that was sketchy. I want more traction control or I want less now. And you can adjust it easily. Same goes for the wheelie control. On the Aprilia, you can adjust it using the cruise control lever. Those are two features you can actually change on the fly and you really do feel a difference. I thought that was really smart, the way Aprilia handled that. On the BMW, you do have a similar feature. You can shift the traction control offset from -7 to +7. But when it comes to actually activating and adjusting individual systems, you really have to dive deep into the sub-menus. It's a bit more complicated and fiddly. That's something Ducati does better, where you can not only activate the riding modes with the mode button, but also go straight into the setup menu and adjust the parameters linked to each mode. Ducati has implemented that very well. As for electronics, we should talk about the suspension systems. All three bikes use electronic suspension. Ducati and Aprilia rely on Öhlins, the electronically adjustable variants, while BMW continues with their DDC system. The DDC, thanks to its internal magnet valve, offers a huge range of adjustability. But that also makes it harder to design a good algorithm for setting it up. BMW has made significant progress in this area. You can now use the DDC system even in high-performance applications. Maybe there are still a few compromises compared to the others, which allow for a wider variety of active modes and adjustments, especially useful for less experienced riders who may not know what compression or rebound damping is. These systems still provide solid suspension performance. And they all work really well. The BMW, as we've mentioned before, is extremely tuned for nimbleness. The basic geometry is arguably too nimble. That helps a lot on the road. It makes the bike very user-friendly. But on the racetrack, you need feedback from the front tire to really feel what the bike is doing, and that's where the BMW struggles a bit. It's almost too agile. To counteract that and settle the bike down a bit, BMW has fitted a steering damper, not electronically controlled but manual, and it's set with quite a bit of damping from the start. You really notice it on the road, or when you're riding out of the pit lane, you try to steer quickly and feel that resistance from the damper. But it's necessary on this bike, especially at high speeds and fast sections. It really helps. So you can tell the chassis is heavily focused on agility, but that also brings a few drawbacks on track. Combined with the short distance from the seat to the steering head, which gives it kind of a supermoto vibe, if you exaggerate a little, it reduces the sense of control compared to the others. On the Ducati, we have a very stable base setup that's still highly manageable and reacts quickly. I think it's one of the best compromises between agility and stability. In combination with the electronic Öhlins suspension and the way the ECU manages it, it's incredibly precise. The feedback is excellent. Maybe where it could be improved a little is in very tight corners, in small radius turning. But as we've probably explained in the individual videos, you can adjust the geometry in various ways to improve that. The Ducati gives you that flexibility. The Aprilia also comes with Öhlins suspension and is slightly softer in auto mode than the Ducati. That might actually suit less experienced riders better. It builds a bit more confidence through feel. Where the Aprilia really differs is in how it prioritizes stability even more. That's a big plus for racers because that added stability gives you tons of feedback at the limit and clearly tells you when you're pushing too much on the front end. On the flip side, the Aprilia is a bit harder to handle, not as agile. That means beginners might struggle a bit because it takes more effort to tip the bike from side to side. We've got the Aprilia here. I believe it's the only one of the three with cast wheels. The Ducati in the S version comes standard with forged wheels, and the BMW has that unique feature of carbon wheels. Naturally, these rotating gyroscopic forces have a massive influence on stability, but generally what I want is as little rotating mass as possible coming from the wheels. That means ideally I'd go in and try to regain stability through geometry changes because I definitely want to take advantage of the benefits that come with lighter wheels. You don't just feel those benefits when transitioning from one lean angle to the other. You also notice them during acceleration and braking. So it's not something I'd be willing to give up easily. If I were looking for more stability, I'd rather tweak the bike's geometry a bit than change the wheels. Now, BMW has gone a step further and added a special sensor to precisely determine how the bike is behaving, a steering angle sensor. This sensor helps the electronics figure out how far the bars are turned, and that's useful not only for detecting drift angles under acceleration, but especially, and here BMW is definitely doing something unique, under braking. There's a special mode where you can actually drift into corners while braking. It works in combination with the ABS sensors. When the system detects that the bike is starting to go sideways under braking, it automatically reduces braking force. That means even a relatively inexperienced rider can try drifting into a corner because the system helps manage it with this extra sensor. It's called slide by brake. Normally doing that manually requires a really good feel for the bike to control everything properly. But this steering angle sensor helps a ton. It makes it possible to get the bike sideways deliberately. Now, I wouldn't say it actually helps you go faster, but for riders who say, hey, I'd like to try this because it's fun, and I'll admit it is fun, then this system really helps. You can really grab the brakes, even the rear, and get the bike sliding. And if the drift angle gets too big, which the system detects via that sensor, it automatically reduces braking force at the rear wheel slightly, and that helps the bike stabilize again. I tried it a few times, and it works really well. That's something, for example, the other two bikes can't do.
Actually, all three suspension setups are quite different, and the BMW is definitely on the firm side, but even so, I often had the feeling, especially when accelerating out of corners or while leaned over in a turn with bumps in the road, that it started to wallow quite a bit. And I personally found that very uncomfortable. With the Ducati, I can't say anything negative. It really stays planted on the road. You can ride it harder since the suspension is set up quite stiffly to begin with. You really have to push it to get it working. You need to brake hard and accelerate hard to even get any real movement out of it. And it also needs that kind of input when turning into corners to really get the fork to compress properly. That's what lets you carve a clean arc through the turn. The Aprilia is a bit softer. It's actually very pleasant and clearly the easiest to ride. So for beginners, out of the three, it's definitely the best option.
I'm going to group suspension and handling together here because to me they often go hand in hand. I think it's funny, Asil, what I really like about the BMW on the street, which is how nimble it feels, that actually became a bit of a disadvantage for me on the racetrack. Out of all three, I felt the BMW was the most agile, but also the one that felt more unsettled in fast corners. You don't notice it if that's the only bike you ride, but once you start comparing, you do. And I actually rode them one after the other to verify exactly that. Is it really the case or not? Long story short, I thought, well, this is the most agile one. Great, everything's fine. But I wasn't expecting it to feel so different, especially in the faster corners. In the slower corners, interestingly, I constantly had the feeling that the BMW wanted to run wide at the front. I could hold a tighter line more easily and even adjust it on the other two bikes. I'm talking about the two tightest corners on the track here. With the BMW, I didn't really have the confidence to just lean in even more if needed. Why that is, honestly, I can't say in technical terms, that it just felt that way. And in the second session, it was exactly the same again. The Ducati, on the other hand, is definitely the firmest. For me, it already feels very close to a full-on race bike in terms of its core character. It's just serious, it's precise, it's sharp, it wants to be pushed, which is why, for me, the Aprilia ends up being the best compromise once again. I think the Aprilia is just beautifully balanced in so many areas, and that balance means that even regular riders won't be overwhelmed, and it doesn't have any extreme highs or lows. It's simply rock solid, maybe not quite as razor sharp as the Ducati, but still more stable than the BMW. That's something Aprilia has really nailed.
Personally, I really like the braking system on the BMW because it's super sharp right from the initial bite. You don't expect that at first, but it really decelerates hard. You can brake really late and immediately have a lot of pressure in the system. However, I think it does require a bit of experience and skill to trail brake cleanly into the corner because the window between braking and not braking is pretty small. So for beginners, it might be a little trickier, but I personally really liked it. The system on the Ducati also works flawlessly. It's really nice to brake with. You've got a solid pressure point and you can trail it nicely into the corner. So overall, it's just a very well-rounded package. And on the Aprilia, I didn't like it quite as much because the pressure point comes in quite late and only builds up gradually. You don't get full braking power right away, so you really have to pull the lever in quite far. On our test bike, we also had a slight issue with brake judder that caused a lot of instability under braking. It started to vibrate a lot. But that's obviously not how it's supposed to be, and under normal conditions, the braking would definitely work better.
You've got a lot of rigid brake lines and fittings on the BMW, not many flexible parts, which helps deliver a very defined pressure point. The master cylinder plays a big role in that as well. Its bore size determines how the hydraulic ratio works with the calipers, and that directly affects the feel of the brake. And BMW has done a great job here. Another reason it feels so sharp is the pairing of brake pads and discs. They've gone for a really aggressive combination with a lot of initial bite. That means you don't need much hand pressure at all, which avoids giving the system a mushy feel. Because of course, the more force I need to apply with my hand, the spongier the brake will feel, just because I have to pull harder. The BMW benefits a lot from that aggressive pad disc combo. You just need to touch the lever and it bites hard. Of course, there are drawbacks too. When it comes to fine modulation, it doesn't offer quite the same finesse as the other two bikes. As you already mentioned, both the Ducati and Aprilia use Brembo Stylemer calipers and have the same disc diameter, so the systems are quite similar. They still deliver strong braking power, but are also very easy to modulate. It's not that the BMW isn't modulatable, but you do need to get used to it. It's not like you can just dive into a corner all the way to the apex and expect everything to feel perfect right away. It takes some familiarization. All three bikes have ABS, of course, and you can partially deactivate it in stages. So even in a panic stop, the BMW will keep the front wheel from locking up, unless you go over a certain lean angle. That means you can go hard into a corner on the BMW. But once you get close to the apex and want to make small corrections, that's where you need to be a bit more cautious with the BMW.
Out on the road, I spoke very positively about the Aprilia in terms of ergonomics. But now on the racetrack, I have to say I don't like it quite as much. It was actually a bit surprising, but I really struggled to find a good riding position on it. And even though I'm not that tall, my elbows were already bumping into my knees. So if you're a bit taller, but like you're definitely going to have issues. You just can't move far enough back because the seat goes up immediately behind you and there's simply no space. On top of that, the tank feels very angular to me. When you're hanging off the bike, after a while, it actually starts to hurt on the inside of your thigh. I found that really uncomfortable, to be honest. And another issue is the wind protection. If I really tuck in as low as possible and make myself as small as I can and really try hard on the straight, then it kind of works, that I can rest my helmet on the tank and the wind flows over me reasonably well. But that's not always possible, especially if you're a bit taller. And then it gets annoying because the wind hits you right on the helmet. Over time, that gets tiring. The Ducati, on the other hand, I have to say that is just a fantastic overall package. You feel super secure on the bike. Everything fits from your hands to your knees to the foot pegs. And aerodynamically on the straight, it's just a really well-rounded package for me. I honestly have nothing negative to say there. With the BMW, I actually really liked it as well. You sit much further forward and your hands are a lot closer to you. But for me, that actually gave a very secure feeling. I felt really comfortable with the tank, especially when hanging off the bike. And on the straights, it was also much more pleasant just because the tank is so much larger.
If I only had to ride 1 or 2 sessions, then I'd probably still pick the BMW. Because to me, the BMW is somehow the most comfortable. And I stand by this. Riders at my skill level, if you're comfortable, you're faster than if you're uncomfortable. That's something I firmly believe. And with the BMW, that closeness, the short distance between the seat and the handlebars, that works really well for me at my height of 1,85 m. The knee angle is okay too. I think it even has the lowest seat height, if I'm not mistaken. And I have to say, ergonomically, I get along quite well with the BMW. But if I had to ride all day over and over again, actually, I think the riding position on the Ducati is also really good, even if it's a bit more demanding at first. But like Lena already said, thanks to the really good aerodynamics, and we do have a really tall windscreen here, you can actually tuck in pretty well, even at 1,85 m. It's more tiring at first, yes, but after a while you get used to the riding position. And then ergonomically, but really just on the racetrack, the Ducati is actually the best for me. And I'm with Lena on this. The Aprilia kind of feels like it's somewhere in between. The wide tank doesn't really bother me personally, but you do notice that there's a bit less aerodynamic protection. I also struggle to make myself as small behind the Aprilia's windscreen as I could behind the Ducati's. So even though the Aprilia is also comfortable to sit on, I'd say over the course of a full day, the Ducati would be my pick.
Yes, it's the same for me, as I'm always looking for ways to move around, to shift around. That means in order to really tuck in and fold myself up, I often have to slide all the way to the back. And sliding to the back is something the BMW and the Ducati actually allow me to do best. On the Aprilia, like I already briefly mentioned when we talked about street riding, I had trouble with that. And that didn't change on the racetrack either, because it pushes you forward. Due to that sloping seat, it has this kind of dip where you really sink in nicely, which also gives you good support. So in principle, I didn't think that was bad at all. It's just that with my height, it was honestly a bit limiting for me. I didn't feel quite as comfortable on it. But Martin, you're the racer. So now, of course, you'll want to tell us which of these bikes makes for the best lap times when you're really going for it.
For me, when we talk about ergonomics, the first thing that matters is being able to ride very fast for a very long time. Or to put it differently, being able to ride fast for the longest time possible. And for that, it comes down to getting into a position where I have full control over all the inputs and can achieve both maximum acceleration and maximum braking. And with the BMW, that's relatively difficult due to its basic layout. Because when I sit on it, and usually the first thing that determines the riding position for me is the distance from the tank to the clip-ons, and that's become extremely short here. Now, sure, like you said, you can slide pretty far back to make it work if you're a taller rider like you are. But if I do that, I'm shifting my whole body, the entire package, in a way that moves the center of gravity into an unfavorable position for fast riding. And that's why the BMW is extremely challenging when it comes to riding purely for lap times. Even under braking, where you automatically slide forward and brace yourself against the tank with your thighs, trying to let your whole upper body fall forward, the distance to the clip-ons is just so short. I'm basically reaching down onto the bars from above, and I really struggle to brace my upper body properly. That demands a huge amount of effort during hard braking. And on the other end, during acceleration, when it's about really putting down a lot of power, it's important to shift your weight forward, because I want to stop the front wheel from lifting. That's one of the key factors in how much acceleration I can get alongside the engine power. And again, that's something I struggle with when I'm sitting so far forward with the bars basically right at my chest. If the handlebars were a bit farther away, I'd be able to move my upper body forward more easily and have more room to control the bike. But when it's too tight, it limits me. I often call it supermoto style, where your body is extremely close to the handlebar. That's great for fun, playful riding. But when it comes to pushing a superbike to the absolute limit and getting everything out of it, that becomes more difficult. With the Ducati by comparison, the layout is much longer. You have way more room, and you can even reach forward to the bars from farther back. The clip-ons on the Ducati are also spaced slightly farther apart. That means I still get stability from the chassis, but also a certain nimbleness. During acceleration phases, I can lean my upper body forward well. I've got leverage on my hands to pull my upper body into position. And that makes riding the Ducati fast laps relatively relaxed. With the Aprilia, it's kind of an in-between solution compared to the other two. You still have a really good distance between the seat and the handlebars, which works very well. But where it's gotten a bit tight is the distance between the seat and the foot pegs. That puts your foot quite high up, and that gets in the way a bit when trying to really work with the bike. I'm often forced to go from one lean angle to the other from a very deep squat. And sometimes I run into the issue of my elbow brushing against my knee. That's something you definitely notice on the Aprilia. But for anyone who's heading to the racetrack, that's relatively easy to fix. Most track riders swap out the seat anyway. If you just raise the seat a little bit and maybe lower the foot pegs slightly, that problem goes away entirely. And then even the Aprilia gives you an optimal seating position for racetrack performance.
All the categories are now covered. I hope you're all still with us, because now it's your turn one more time. We need your thumbs up and we need your comments. Was everything covered? Would you like more info next time for the 2026 Superbike comparison, or maybe less? I'm definitely really curious to hear your feedback on our test, both from the road and from the racetrack. So go ahead and drop it in the comments. And I think we're slowly getting to the end of the day now. Time to call it a night. We're going to enjoy a cold beer, and then it's time to head home. We want to say a big thank you for watching, and goodbye for now. See you next time.